Hello and welcome to the SAFE podcast. My name is Jared Devine. I'm an undergraduate Behavioral and Cognitive Neuroscience major at the University of Florida. At UF, I have an organization with which this podcast shares its name, which stands for Spirituality Accessible for Everyone. The purpose of the club and of this podcast is to demystify spirituality, which we understand to be little more than the sum of all the ways people attempt to improve their relationships with their inner worlds and mental health. We take an integrative approach in the club, hosting talks from preachers and gurus of various traditions, as well as academics with backgrounds in fields like philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience. We also discuss our personal practices and spiritual journeys in the hopes of making such conversation less taboo. We provide UF students a community with whom they can explore their beliefs and cultivate practices with open minds, in a way not divorced from science and other aspects of their worldviews, to ultimately improve their quality of life. Here, we hope to do much of the same. In this episode, I speak with co-host Shyam Dhulashia, a study coordinator and good friend of mine working in the lab of Dr. Justin Riddle, a neuroscience professor at Florida State University. To greatly oversimplify in the interest of brevity, Shyam works with Dr. Riddle on projects focused on cognitive control, using different types of non-invasive brain stimulation to study electrical signaling and functional connectivity in the brain, the results of which hold weight in novel treatments of mood disorders. The lab's work is fascinating and worth checking out. Outside of the lab, Shyam has a spiritual community in Tallahassee called Sunday Sangha, which you'll hear more about in the episode, where he holds personal growth challenges, group practices, pop-up breathwork tents, and the like. In this pilot episode, we talk, and especially ramble, about what we've done, what we're doing, and what we want to do, with talk of spirituality and neuroscience intermittently. We would really appreciate any and all feedback as we progress, as we are eager to improve our podcasting skills, and we hope to have episodes out on a bi-weekly-ish basis. So thank you so much for at least, I can't say thank you for listening, but thank you for at least clicking on this such that you've heard me talk up until this point. Hope you enjoy.
And we are live. Safe
Amazing.
podcast.
So excited. What have you been up to, my guy?
I've been up to, oh man, quite a bit. Right now I'm working on grad school applications, starting to lead a couple of projects. So starting data analysis for the meditation retreat study.
Yeah.
And
How was that? That had to have been insane.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was incredible. Like
Nice.
beyond any words, it was absolutely ineffable. Yeah, it was with 9 really advanced meditators
Mhm.
who have been practicing most of their lives and really have a deep understanding of various different practices. But in particular, the practice itself was called fire Kasina meditation. And this is where meditators will stare at a candlelit flame. And over the course of some time, they'll close their eyes and see an after image of that flame, whether it's like a red image, like a red dot, green dot, and they start to concentrate more and more on the dot, and that essentially unravels itself and almost kind of seems like it deconstructs their visual system in a way that just unravels incredible imagery, vibrant details and colors that they can just interact with, they can hold in their mind's eye, they can start to manifest imagery, manifest themselves into scenes
Mhm.
that they can interact with. And yeah, it's quite profound. It's quite profound. And another practice that was very prominent in that was called insight practice or Vipassana tradition. And that has meditators progress through various stages of insight,
Mhm.
which are contextualized by Daniel Ingram, the person who actually ran the retreat. And he's pretty much mapped all of these different stages into a taxonomy where we actually have definitions and symptoms that can identify where someone is at in their meditative progression through insight stages. So it's really, really interesting. And for example, these insight stages look like maybe the arising and passing away, which is this peak experience, this unitive experience, feel like oneness with everything. Some people may report having an ego dissolution. And generally, what comes after that stage is called the dissolution
Mhm.
or knowledge of suffering. And that begins the dark night of the soul. So that is a very interesting period that is phenomenologically similar to clinical depression.
Mm.
And we can actually see like everyone in the retreat really going through this experience. And Daniel and members of the organization that he works with, the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, they have really made an emphasis of like understanding that when someone is going into a retreat like this, anything can happen. So they
Mhm.
have to be aware of all these different stages. They have to be aware that within the first 3 days, they're probably going to end up in the dark night of the soul, or what they call the murk. And that is very difficult to maintain one's practice in. And it can induce like a lot of traumatic and really uncomfortable to deal with sensations. But the emphasis is to keep practicing and to practice with the right guidance, with the right support. And what was really special about this particular retreat, I feel, was that there was a strong community. And every lunch, every dinner, we all spoke and really expressed how we were feeling throughout the process. And essentially, that helped us just understand where everyone was at, provide the right guidance, provide the right thing to say in order for someone to like progress more smoothly through the dark night and through all these different stages.
Mhm.
And it was just made a very supportive environment. And I feel like with meditation retreats, a lot of people expect them to be like silent retreats, like 10-day Goenka Vipassana retreats. But this was very different. And I really enjoyed this. I think it was a great, great like touch and taste, especially for when we're running research for a retreat like this. Because it helps also the researcher to contextualize these different experiences to understand where someone is at while they're getting their brain measured.
Yeah.
I was the researcher for this retreat, and I measured EEG data while people were meditating, while they were resting, and while they were completing a whole plethora of cognitive tasks.
Mhm.
So essentially, we were trying to engage specific network scale activity um, in various brain regions and essentially try to map out the different network dynamics and how they change when
Mm.
someone's progressing through different stages. Because the first session we took their measurements during the murk or the dark night of the soul, and the second session was like a peak experience measurement while people were going into like powered up states,
Mm.
states with more equanimity, and they were able to like really have some crazy meditative abilities like manifesting imagery, astral travel even, and yeah, some really really interesting phenomena that occurred. um Not sure how far I can get into the nitty gritty of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Also,
Here, I wrote down some layperson questions I have
yeah,
along the way. So my first question was, so these are obviously expert meditators doing something they practice for a really long time, but have you ever, or do you know, have you heard talk of how people like me can play with after images in our meditations, or some examples of cool objects we can try to focus on in our meditations to get into
yeah,
deep?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, first thing I would mention is be aware of the risks first.
Mm.
That if you practice for an extended period of time, there's a high likelihood that you're going to end up in this murk phase, and it's going to be difficult to meditate,
Hmm.
and also difficult to deal with worldly things in your everyday life.
Hmm.
But Daniel has great resources for this on the eprc.org, and he also has a website on fire casino meditation, the entire type of meditation, and has a whole glossary of terms, even has a whole book on it. So that helps a ton. But essentially, for anyone listening, what you can do right now, what I'm doing right now, is staring at a light bulb on my ceiling fan
Hmm.
and just looking at the glow of the light. And I can see that just vibrant yellowness and then just a red after, like, outer ring. So I'm going to close my eyes. And now I can see this, like, yellow center and a green, like, outer luminescence, and then a red ring outside of it. And that is now in the center of my visual field. So I can just meditate, relax into this feeling. And then eventually it might start moving around. I might see some other colors appear alongside it or around it. Maybe I can focus on those other colors as well as holding that dot in the center of my attention. So then my attention is kind of diffusing outwards to other parts of my visual field. And then eventually they might start to coalesce. They might start to interact with each other. And the trick is not to, like, focus on just one thing and, like, zoom in on it, or else it's just going to move around and you're going to lose it. You want to focus on the entire span of the visual field, but trying to hold the dot in the center.
Cool. So you can literally use stuff like a light bulb. I've actually played with that before, like just trying to stare at what are those images you see when you close your eyes, just like on a day-to-day experience. What is it called? The little light random
Floaters?
floaters. They're gonna be floaters, but also when you close your eyes, like I often see like some like red dots, if I stared at
Yeah.
light, or there's always something in there.
Yeah, yeah. Any of those are interesting meditation objects.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because when people think about getting to really deep states, they're thinking of people that are professionals out staring at a fire in a big circle, but you can do these things at home, and it feels sometimes spiritual practices feel so gatekeepy because people always jump to the masters. They never think about the 99% of people that are just playing with objects of consciousness, and we always
Right.
think trying to create those states, the stage 1, 2, 3, 4 that you were talking about, where we see crazy photorealistic images. But that's all our brain's job. All we have to do is put our attention on one thing and try to hold it and keep practicing that. Our brain does all the cool stuff, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I
Yeah,
think all we really are in this, like, whole scene is our attention.
literally. Yeah.
And even at that, our attention is made up of different sensations just
Hmm.
interacting with each other in our brain.
Hmm.
And that in itself is, like, that's when you get into the profound meditative states as well. Is
Hmm.
unraveling what is attention even. But for now, like, what can our attention do? And that is a lot of different things. That is very, very interesting.
Yeah, it's
So I
true.
mean, yeah, like, I'd love to talk about just, like, the power of our attention,
Yes.
because ultimately, like, that is where, like, the direction of where our lives are heading.
Hmm.
Whatever we attend to is conscious to us, or we are conscious of that,
Hmm.
even though there are various other conscious processes that are actually interacting with that. But what we're attending to is ultimately what we can have some semblance of control over, or some feeling of control.
Exactly. Exactly. For
And
sure.
that can give us sense of agency, well-being. And I think that is like truly the power of meditation, of various spiritual practices.
Hmm. Another
But
spiritual. Oh, go ahead. Well, another aspect of spiritual life that came to mind when we're talking about trying to have really goal directed, or yeah, goal directed attention, broadly speaking, not always like
mhm,
a monetary goal, but it also made me think of people who give up all of their attachments, all their material possessions, and all the things that mess with their brain. Like when we do dopamine detoxes and stuff, it's really just freeing up our ability to exert control over our attention. It's kind of always what it boils down to.
absolutely. I love that. Yeah. 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 No, exactly. And yeah, dopamine is such a huge part of our lives. It controls our lives.
Hmm.
And what can we do to make sure that we are taking active control over our dopamine system?
Hmm.
What do you think that looks like?
Whew. There's probably so much to unpack because we have the best scientists in the world investing their entire scientific careers into programming everything to mess with our dopamine systems as much as possible and keep us hooked on things and make purchases. um an experiment I did for a year, I finally got off the experiment, was switching to a flip phone just so I don't constantly have like pretty much like all of the secrets of the universe in one search bar at my fingertips disposal all the time. That was one lifestyle change I made. But for more minor things, I think it's the basics. It's trying to cultivate a practice. You don't even have to call it a meditation, but just some time every day where you're not putting something in your brain. Some I call it true alone time. Alone time is not just not hanging out with people. True alone time is minimizing the number of stimuli around you. It's like people think of cleaning while listening to a podcast as alone time. That can be informative, productive time, but you're not really alone if you have another voice playing in the room. If you're listening to music, driving, even stuff like going for a run. I'd say going for a walk is a little more passive, but just taking some time every day to it's just every single thing you add, every bit of podcast, every bit of dopamine, to speak very unscientifically, that you throw into the picture, the harder it is to exert control over your attention. So just taking some periods of minimal stimulation every day, I think, is at the core of it. And then every person can decide what they're willing to give up, because at the end of the day, a lot of these most enlightened people, and it's not a requirement, but a lot of these great people that we look up to have given up a ton of creature comforts in the pursuit of higher states. And we don't have to do all of it, but I think most people have something they can give up. And honestly, a lot of the time, they're things that will further other goals as well, like giving up Coke or giving up, either kind of Coke for that matter. These things can really be healing in physical ways as well. So that's a
Yeah.
start.
Yeah. So at the Riddle Lab, we're working on a study
Mm-hmm.
um, treating anhedonic depression,
Mm-hmm.
which in these patients, they aren't able to exert will onto the world with motivation. And there's something that is dissonant between their attention and their like dopaminergic, striatal, and motor system. So
Mm-hmm.
like how they're exerting will, and how they are identifying what goals are valuable, what goals will maximize their time, and what goals will actually yield a positive mood. So in that sense, like what we do to treat these patients is administer transcranial electrical stimulation that targets two brain regions and couples them together. One is the lateral prefrontal cortex,
Mm-hmm.
which is responsible for evaluating and planning our goals. And the other is the motor cortex, which is responsible for actually exerting the action. And the motor cortex has some um, units and circuits that relate to the subthalamic dopaminergic system. But essentially, while they receive the stimulation that's designed to couple these two brain regions together, they're filling out these activity worksheets, these behavioral activation worksheets, where we have them identify their top values in life. And based on these values, they will create a worksheet that has specific goals and activities that will help further these values. And essentially, they're kind of holding themselves accountable for achieving these goals and planning out these actions throughout a weekly calendar. And every day they'll come back throughout the week and reflect on whether they did the goal. How did doing the goal make them feel? And essentially from there, possibly, well, we don't have results, but we would like to see that the more that they do these goals, the more improvements that we can see in their symptoms of depression. Because they're actually doing things and attending to things that are of value to them. And the more that they complete these things that are of value, the more, in theory, that their mood will increase. They'll feel more fulfilled, more intrinsically motivated to continue upregulating this like positive feedback loop of motivation and mood. And I think that is key to our well-being. That is key to any aspect of spirituality, human flourishing, is like upregulating these things that are valuable. But my question is, how do we identify what is valuable to us? What are our top values in life? Because we can say all these different things like education, work, our salary. These things are valuable to us. But there might be some like hierarchy with value where things are even more valuable, like family, your emotional health, physical well-being, your social environment. And often people neglect these in favor of pursuing things that are typically defined as valuable by our societal expectations, by what we need in order to live, make a living, and function in this modern world. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on like identification of values.
Okay, I want to take it one step back really quick because I want to ask one question about the research project. Is the brain stimulation, is that repeated, or is it a one-time thing and then you're measuring them after 8 weeks after, whatever?
So it is repeated for 5 days.
In a row.
Yeah, 5 days in a row.
Okay.
And during these 5 days, those are the 5 days that they're doing the behavioral activation.
Cool. That is a really cool applied down-to-earth study. I really like it. That's incredible. Trying to figure out what your values are. Geez. This is like kind of what I've been kind of subsumed in for a while, you know? Obviously, as college students, I'm sure your experience was and is the exact same. Like putting on a new me costume every single week, it feels like, you know, and trying to explore all these different routes. And I can't help but think that there is no end to this at all. I don't even think people who try to circumscribe themselves to one path really 100% feel sure of it all the time. But that's one solution that works for some people, just being like, for example, I am a Christian. I'm going to pursue this path. I'm gonna stick with these values that I was born with or came to, and those are going to guide me forever. But someone like myself and a lot of my friends, a lot of people in Safe, the club, which we'll talk about later, I think embracing the constant shifting tides is another equally valid solution. And it's been working for me. So I try to spend some time in introspection every single week, some meditation, some of the things I talked about before, some minimal stimulation time. And then randomly, there'll just be an aha moment, it feels like, just out of nowhere. What if I lived this way? What if I changed this habit? What if this habit is at the root of my suffering in some way? And and you just play with it and you just fine tune it, and then you'll have a setback and you'll be like, well, that was wrong. So you're back a step. And some people give up there, but I'm sure you've heard before this idea that like improving your mental health, embarking on a spiritual journey, whatever it might be, it goes up, it goes down a little bit, but it's still a net positive if you zoom out long enough. And then you get closer and closer to, and this is a metaphor, but whatever deep inside of us we really want to do, whatever our spirit, our soul, whatever our highest self wants us to do. I think you can get nearer and nearer to it, but you'll never hit the mark, very early on. And I think we just have to embrace that. I think that's the best thing to do.
I think, yeah, the journey of doing it, that process is like one of the most valuable things that we can do.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really makes me like think about like Jungian shadow work and like identifying what are the roots of my suffering, like what are these complexes and habits and desires, behaviors that are so latent in my psyche. How did they get there?
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we bring that to light, he finds that the more we experience synchronicities, the more we actually see like some kind of inherent meaning in our lives that is unique to us. And yeah, that I think it's so potent in my life. That's manifested in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious about how it's manifested in yours and how it's led you to want to pursue your research, safe, all the work that you're doing right now.
Shadow work in particular?
Shadow
Or
work and any practice or any um, specific event, maybe a peak experience in your life that has been very valuable.
peak experiences are something that have been sparse in my life. I haven't had that many experiences that I would consider peak experiences, but I've had like peak, really transformative, slow unravelings of things over time.
Know, um, as far as starting safe goes, I would say it was a long period of slowly creeping out of a really dark period in my life through very simple techniques and realizing that these things do not have to be exclusive to gurus and people who don't work and live completely abnormal, atypical lives. And realizing that 5 minutes of meditation a day sounds trivial because it's a small unit of time, but realizing that those kinds of very basic practices over long periods of time can result in extremely powerful transformations.
Another thing that I've thought about is that people really feel, a lot of people are almost hard-headed about this idea that spirituality is something you do on your own. It involves journaling or taking a walk by yourself. But as you mentioned in the example of the fire Kasina meditation, it can be a social thing that you're sharing. And I would argue that sharing it with other people and being open about it can be so liberating. I understand some people are private and I respect that just fine, but you can grow so much by having discussions with other people, which is why that's what the focus of my club is. Safe. We sit in a circle and we will discuss whatever we've been working on in ourselves. Sometimes it gets overly personal if people are comfortable with it, or very, very personal. Sometimes it's just, oh, I meditated 5 minutes a day. So for some people, it's just accountability. But no matter what, being able to share that with someone, I would argue, enhances it greatly. And it doesn't have to involve solitude and silence and all these things we commonly associate with spiritual practices. It can be very open and shared and community based. So that I was really inspired by going to the Temple of the Universe, which is here in Gainesville, Florida, where I go to school. which is led by Michael Singer, an incredible New York Times bestselling author, but primarily spiritual practitioner who has had this temple, which incorporates all sorts of religious practices, but kind of hinges on Eastern traditions, letting go of attachments. He's definitely influenced by Stoicism. It's better to look this stuff up than me try to explain it, but ultimately, just seeing how simple it was and how everyone in the room just felt comfortable, felt like we were all brothers and sisters. And like in a discussion at the end, we could all just talk about whatever we wanted. There was no, oh, am I oversharing? There was none of that. Nobody cared at all, right? Because we were seeking help from one another and everyone wanted to give help as well. So spaces like that are so important, so rare. And yeah, I think that we need a lot more of that.
Community is my biggest passion. And because it allows us to come together and understand for each other, for ourselves, what the hell is going on in this crazy, magnificent, wild experience of twists and turns and cycles and stages. Like, we don't have the resources to actually contextualize any of this spiritual, mystical stuff. Like, and even if we do have the resources, they're all so widely spread out and not accessible. They've been secularized into specific pockets of belief systems and values that nobody actually knows what is going on. Nobody knows what's true.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have some setting, some forum, or just like hanging out with friends, like talking, me and you, we might be able to actually relate on a certain level that, like, I can come with my own beliefs, you come with yours. Maybe there's some middle ground, maybe there's some understanding that we can share, and then we can kind of break through into a new level of understanding.
Mm-hmm.
But without like actually coming together, I feel like we're lost. I feel like there is, yeah, it's hard to find people that truly care to listen to your experience, let alone practice or hold you accountable for your goals or your growth. But ultimately, we need to integrate these experiences together. We need to foster more spaces that, like, maybe if someone takes a psychedelic or has like a peak experience, like, where can they go to receive support? If someone, like, even in breathwork circles nowadays, people sell breathwork retreats or just like single weekend sessions, and people have these wild spiritual awakenings. But then they go out into the world and their life just crumbles right in front of them, and they don't have the psychological support that should honestly come with the breath work. If you're giving someone such a peak experience, the cost should also include some integration support, especially if the person who's administering the breath work or the psychedelic knows what they're doing. And ultimately, that should come in a community setting, right? Somewhere where multiple people can share and discuss openly and even practice together, understand how we can ground these experiences. So that's another project that I've been working on now, is like figuring out how we can put together a container or some kind of course for integration, where facilitators, practitioners of various levels, of various types of things, like from yoga, from psychedelic therapy or shamanism to like psychiatrists. Maybe there's a space where we can all come together and discuss how we can contextualize different stages of insight, maybe, and provide unique different types of practices, not just strictly based upon one single lineage, but something that can be accessible. Someone can just come to a therapist or a community member and tell them, this is what I've experienced, and this is what I believe in. These are the types of practices that I want to do. Do you know anyone that can help me out?
Yeah.
And I think that is a huge gap that we're missing in mental health, in spiritual circles, community.
Right.
So like that medium between people that are facilitating in community, as well as psychiatrists, psychotherapists. Like if someone is having these wild experiences, they go to a psychiatrist, and instead of being put on medication to numb these experiences for the next 6 months, and they don't see them ever again, they don't get support or integration support for those experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a psychiatrist can refer them to a practitioner that is like maybe a certified integration specialist,
Mm-hmm.
who knows like a lot of different stages of spiritual progression, of insight, and knows how to meet someone where they're at.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, really provide the right context and the right practice that is specific to them, and help them have support and friends that have also gone through similar experiences.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's something that I'm very, very passionate about. And that's just in the works right now, in terms of like trying to find out who would be willing to support that,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's even possible to create some kind of certification, or even if that's already happening and I have no idea,
Yeah.
maybe we don't have to reinvent the wheel, you know.
Right.
Maybe there is a model for that, and I mean, it doesn't seem like there should be any red tape around that,
Mm-hmm.
like there might be with like psychedelic therapy. This is just integrating into community and finding people to practice, to talk with.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure this is one of your long-term goals, but if I understand, want a more blurred line, and I feel very strongly about this too, but a more blurred line between psychiatrists and neuroscientists and like what we call hippie healers, crystal meditation people. And I really agree with this too, because sometimes it feels like when you're talking to one side or the other, every scientist has to swear their allegiance to, only talking about what's in the literature explicitly. They have no room for anything outside of that. And then some hippie says that this herb will instantly cure cancer, and it feels like there's just like this clear line. Where are all the people, that are interested in both? It's so weird that they're, because you usually reach crazy states of consciousness and crazy scientific discoveries from I feel like it fundamentally boils down to curiosity, whether it be exploring the phenomenology of consciousness or the functional neuroscience of consciousness. So, it's so unfortunate that these things are so separate, because we're, at the end of the day, it all is just curiosity, and it's just being directed in slightly different sides of the same coin, So are you interested in long-term partnering with psychiatrists and psychologists, and obviously maybe becoming a psychologist, long-term plans? That's my question.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. So backtracking to like, is there anyone that's actually interested in mending these two worlds? So there are, and it's actually great people like Daniel Ingram, people at the retreat. They are part of the Emergent Phenomenology Research Consortium, EPRC. And what the EPRC is working on currently is incredible. They are trying to contextualize all of these mystical emergent practices or emergent phenomena and create some kind of understanding that can be translated across various belief systems, and it can be ontologically neutral.
Mm-hmm. Can you
And
define
then,
that real quick?
yeah, so ontologically neutral means that someone does not have to commit, in order for someone to understand a specific phenomena, they don't have to commit to believing in a certain religious or foundational belief system.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is like purely phenomena that are occurring in our mental and our mental and physical worlds even. And hopefully these emergent phenomena with the right context, we can start to understand how we can study them if there's a
Mm-hmm.
neural basis to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's the work that they're trying to fund. And they are also trying to put together a board certified specialty for psychiatry.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a big deal.
Yeah. And yeah, they've actually just released a paper on defining emergent phenomena. So I'd highly suggest reading up on that. And that's like really the first step towards creating some kind of specialty or curriculum for understanding and contextualizing these things. And hopefully this can yield things like being able to distinguish what is, if any, is there a line between like spiritual awakening and psychosis,
Right.
or like the dark night of the soul and
Mhm.
depression? We don't know that. Psychiatrists don't know that. Neuroscientists don't know that. And I think it's very valuable to understand that
Right.
in order to get someone the help that they need. So that's something that I'm extremely passionate about. And yeah, in the future, my goals would be to study more of these meditation retreats, these advanced altered states and emergent phenomena, find some kind of neural basis, and possibly help develop a neuroscientific metric to understand if we can see like where someone is at in their insight stages based on their task-based network activity as well as their meditation network activity, and correlating that to phenomenology reports, symptom reports, and their unique traits, and possibly developing more methods to specifically understand and precisely localize functional networks in their brain so that we can see how these networks are interacting at a larger scale depending on where they're at in their mental state, in their in their psychological or spiritual well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And if their state changes and network specific activity change over time as they're progressing through their practice or through whatever treatment they're on, can we see different interactions in their brain networks? And ideally, I would love to help kind of mold this into a model for therapy, for psychiatry,
Mm-hmm.
neuropsychology that can use neurophenomenology.
Real quick, can you quickly define phenomenology?
Yeah, so phenomenology is the study of our unique subjective experience. So describing and characterizing any little phenomena that arises in our conscious awareness. And phenomenology, typically, we can study it using subjective experience reports. So, like, after I come out of a meditation, I can say that for the first couple of minutes, I was staring at this dot, and then it unraveled into unique imagery and colors. And then the colors became these fractalizing patterns that yielded incredible states of equanimity and bliss.
Mhm.
And I can possibly correlate those states of equanimity and bliss to increases in mood. And if over a sustained period of time, increases in symptoms of psychiatric illness or increases in positive symptoms.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, perhaps there's a change in our task-based network activity so that we are engaging more brain networks at once. They have more coherence together, and they might be able to engage in a variety of tasks without using too much effort or energy expenditure in a specific network without tiring that network out. Maybe there's like some kind of flow state that we can quantify based
Mhm.
on that.
Sick. I know this is a couple points back, but I can't help but bring up again. So when you talked about integrating peak experiences, this kind of seems to be the central thesis of what you said so far. That's kind of what you're interested in building a model in psychiatry, if I understand this correctly, where, well, at least that emphasizes making sure that people are doing something with the crazy life-changing moments they have rather than just going into some crazy psychosis spiraling midlife crisis, maybe instead like a midlife awakening. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. But yeah, I that's something I've had so much thought about, because there have been a lot of days where I've been like, wow, today was amazing. I feel like I should be getting something out of this, but I don't know what's next. I think that's a question we have to ask ourselves when we have these what feels like potentially transformative experiences. What next? What do I want to do
Mhm.
with this? And I also want to mention that I don't think these stimuli have to be as big as taking 20 grams of mushrooms and going to another planet. It could also be like, I mean, what about, having just a really nice day, like a high normal day? What do you do with that at the end of the day? What are you going to use that motivation from that very smooth day to do the next day? Spirituality, I want to be a day-to-day thing, and I want it to be, what, I'll leave it there for now. I'll get to the second part of that in a minute. But yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, what are we doing to integrate? Can we journal about our experience? Can we
Hmm.
find a way that can creatively make meaning out of our journal entry?
Right.
Like Dr. Chandler's process of coding, I find that very valuable. And that is like taking a piece of writing, whatever it is, based on like any writing about your experience,
Hmm.
and you look at a couple of the sentences, a couple of words in each sentence, and you identify what does that word mean to me in this moment.
Hmm.
And then based on that, you can start to interpret a story that can kind of, yeah, it can be like a narrative that
Right.
yields a meaning statement of like, what are we going to do with this information, with what we just wrote about, with this day that was so grand and magnificent for us.
Right. Right. So a daily journaling practice. What are some prompts that you could recommend that could be generalizably useful for anyone? Do you ever use a
Well,
prompt for journaling?
I typically just talk about exactly what I'm feeling right now in this moment.
Mhm.
So a prompt can literally just be, how am I feeling right now?
Mhm.
And I can close my eyes for a moment, just tune in to what sensations are arising in my body, maybe feeling into my heart, how fast is it beating. You can notice it beating pretty fast. So that can be anxiety, can also be excitement, just being with either knowing that it's anxiety or knowing that it's excitement, or even knowing that there's uncertainty about what I'm feeling right now. And if there's uncertainty, then I can write about how I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know how I'm feeling. And maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there's a reason for why I can't actively pick apart what emotions are coming up for me. Maybe there's some kind of ambiguity, lack of clarity, or maybe I don't need to know.
Mhm.
Yeah, any of those interpretations are fine. And I don't think the goal of journaling is to get to some kind of clarity. It's just to notice and to note the sensations as they arise.
Mhm.
And from there, you might be able to derive an even deeper practice of identifying the exact emotion that you are feeling and maybe pinpointing that with more practice. And a lot of times I like to journal about my dreams as soon as I wake up, maybe interpreting some subjective meaning. Dreams are very fuzzy, so it's hard to like map one to one. What are the characters in my dreams representing in my life? Typically, it's not what you think it is, but whatever your interpretation is at that moment is very valuable because that is how your attention is working, what your attention is like pinpointing in that experience
Mhm.
can allow you to understand, okay, maybe there's some biases in terms of what I want to focus on or how I want to interpret this. And ultimately, I think identifying where the biases are, that is like key like element of shadow work, I feel. And yeah, I mean it you can get very deep.
So I really like this way of thinking that you've brought up a few times. So first is when you're journaling, you don't exactly have to be seeking a direct substantive insight. And you mentioned earlier another example that basically encompassed, it's not always the end result that we're looking for. Sometimes all of the value is found in the process. And I just wanted to note that our world really tries to put all of our attention on outcomes and things that come out of processes rather than processes. And I personally often succumb to those feelings. Sometimes when I have like a beautiful day that I spent walking through nature, looking at flowers and all that, sometimes I'll just be like, man, I didn't make any money today. So, and I think this is a pretty common predicament. So can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, focusing on, I think it comes back to our values. I think it comes back to our top priorities, our top goals, like, and our attention, how our attention is kind of just drawn and attracted towards that values outcome. to generate that dopamine feedback loop, that positive valence feedback loop. And I mean, that in itself is conducive to our evolution and focusing on the goal, focusing on the outcome. But there's also an outcome, there's also a state of awareness that yields one of the most profound mood states that we can think of just by being present, absolutely present with what is happening right now. What is the process of pursuing this goal without even attaching to the goal? What are even like the bodily sensations, the movements of currents and stimuli around us in our world? How are they coalescing and interacting with my mental states in order to assume or to achieve that goal? And I think that is where we find a process of awakening or a process of synchronicity. Our mental states and our physical states and our surroundings interacting with each other, and our attention being drawn to the interactions in each and every single moment. And how every single stimulus that occurred because of other stimuli that were interacting with each other. So like tuning into this chain of sensations, just, yeah, like bouncing off, cohering, and interacting in order to yield a specific state or to yield a goal. When in actuality, the deeper we go into that practice, we see that the goal is literally just tuning in to how these motions, how these things are happening right now. So Daniel Ingram, something that he mentioned at one of the lunches was, there is no future, there is no past, there is no here and there. There is just now, 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 now. How do these little sensations that make up every single moment of now interact with each other? And how do they yield the next now?
Right.
And that is where you find enlightenment. Your enlightenment is now. There's no better in the world than that, because enlightenment means the cessation of suffering.
Right.
The more that we chase a goal, the more that we assume some kind of role in our lives to attain, then we are suffering because we don't have that. Right. We're always reaching for the next one.
Yes.
We're never content. We're never here. We're never now.
I like this. And another assumption we make, we assume a role. We also assume that there is a goal, or there is something that's going to be infinitely rewarding at the end of whatever we're doing. And I think an important consideration to make, something I think about sometimes, is like, even achieving something is an attachment. It may be a less maladaptive attachment than spending $500 a week on clothes, but like, I think about at work all the time. I work at Target, and my coworkers will always just be talking about, man, can't wait for my 15-minute break, can't wait for my meal, And I mean, it's totally fine to want food and rest, but they're so immersed in what's coming next that, I mean, maybe this doesn't go for everyone. I used to be like that too. On my break, I would always go get this specific Starbucks drink. Colossal waste of money, but but then I reached a point where I started to really try to focus on the physical, my movements and how good it felt to move. And I'm always running around in my job and just trying to I was just like, okay, this is my workout for today. This is a free workout. This isn't some treacherous slaving away for some rich guy. I mean, it may be that as well, but I tried to construct it for subjectively as just a free workout. And that allowed me to just never hate my job again. And it's so much more rewarding than just being this rat in a wheel, getting a little treat every every couple hours. Instead, I was enjoying every second of running on that wheel. And yeah, so even good things, even adaptive things like goals and achievements are attachments, and they're impedances to this kind of enlightenment that I think Daniel Ingram was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it all just comes back to what we're placing our attention on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yeah, if there's any moral of the story for today, anything that we need to integrate, what are we attending to right now?
Right.
Is it useful for our well-being to lessen our suffering, or is what we're attending to actually going to cause us more suffering?
Right. I agree. And especially with an emphasis on, is this going to cause me more suffering in the long term? Because it's so perverse and unfortunate that our world was designed this way, but so many things that immediately relieve our suffering just cause us to pack on more suffering for future you. So treat future you with respect, treat current you with respect too. Don't overdo anything, but it's important to try to get you right now and you in the future on board, and maybe try to be a you that past you would be proud of too, and respect all aspects of yourself across time. Don't just be like, I'm gonna screw over me next week by eating 1 billion chocolate bars today, even though I'm trying to lose weight. Don't make it harder for yourself. Then we're always putting ourselves in debt to future us, and I still am, but I'm striving to stop a little bit.
Yeah, that's all we can do. Thank you, Jared.
Absolutely. I want to wrap up too with just really concretely talking about, in the next couple months, what are we each trying to do with our projects, with making spirituality more accessible?
Yeah. I think
what's your organization called? What are the things you do? Just that.
So initially my organization was called Sunday Sangha. We met as community every Sunday and held a practice that anyone could facilitate, no matter what skill they were. If someone wanted to share their practice, whatever they do, they had the space for it. And it was a fully donation-based format. But now I'm feeling like we need to move past just Sundays. And I feel that as the goal of the organization starts to integrate into various existing models of neuroscience, backed research, and psychiatric and therapeutic contexts, I am thinking of beginning a nonprofit organization called Congruence Community Wellness. And congruence is a term that was founded by Carl Rogers, which is essentially aiming at identifying our values, our goals, and acting accordingly to them, making sure that our actions are in line with our intentions. What about you?
Yeah. So I have this club at UF, and I'll probably record a little bit and put it at the beginning of the video where I talk about what SAFE is a tiny bit. But it's a club where we meet once a week, and we have discussions about spirituality. Every other week, we'll bring on a guest speaker who has some expertise in some faith. It's kind of like a comparative religion club, but not exactly, because we will have, we'll incorporate philosophy, we'll incorporate neuroscience, whatever it is that's relevant to cultivating practices to better ourselves and our mental health. That's what the backbone of my definition of spirituality is. But I was journaling and meditating on what were the shortcomings of SAFE in the first year that we ran it. I only have run it for a year so far. What could I do better? And you and I, Shyam, had a conversation where we talked about the main message was, why stop at UF? And in your case, why stop at FSU? I go to Walmart, 20 blocks away from my house, and I just see, like at UF, all you see is, middle class or better, for the most part, students who are pursuing rigorous educations, really, really fortunate people. And it's nice that that's my reach right now, because students could definitely use spirituality. But then I go to Walmart and there's 10 guys sleeping right outside the door, and there's so much more to Gainesville, so much more to Tally than just the universities. And I've been trying to look into other organizations that have spirituality, like or maybe they even are spiritual centers or healing centers. And I've been trying to collaborate with them and see if we can hold events there and bring all our people there to promote them, while also being a cool thing I can put on our Instagram. So I've been trying to build a lot of, like a little cooperative events with other organizations, not just at UF, but around the city. That's been the biggest thing. I've also been, as part of my mission to, make our spiritual practice a thing that can be openly discussed, and also something that can be done every single day. It doesn't just have to be a peak experience followed by an integration, but also just like our day-to-day thing. So you're in it, but we have this little group chat where we share, if we complete our spiritual practice today, maybe, add a little bit about it, but just open discussion of these personal practices we have. I'm opening that up to SAFE as well. We're also going to have little things scattered throughout the week. We're just going to have those little, these people that serve food at UF outside in this field called Plaza of the Americas. And it's a beautiful grass field that we would all sit in as a community. And I'm going to, every day get out there and just give people the option for this community circle, so that, whenever people feel like having, that kind of community where they can discuss whatever they feel like, and feel unjudged. I want that to be an option every day, not just once a week at 7 p.m., So I'm just trying to, it might, feel, at first I was like, would it be too overwhelming? But I feel comfortable just giving people the option to, have these events almost every day, because it's not very taxing on me. I was going to go get Krishna lunch anyway, So I just want people to have the option, not just once a week, to express themselves and talk about spirituality and really work on bettering themselves. I'm probably forgetting some other points, but yeah, basically SAFE is just going to have a lot more layers to it this time around, and I'm sure this is just going to keep infinitely increasing. But I want it to grow, and I don't just want it to be for the benefit of 20 people at my university.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I want it to be accessible for everyone. That's what the acronym stands for. Spirituality accessible for everyone. So
yeah, that's why we're doing this podcast.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I love how you're branching out to a lot of different communities. And it's not just our minds, it's not just our bodies, it's our communities.
I'm optimistic about it,
mm-hmm.
which is rare.
Thank you so much, Jared.
Thank you so much, Shyam. It's been a pleasure to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a dream.
Yeah, hopefully we can get some more people on this podcast.
Yeah.
Anyone, absolutely anyone, any practitioner, anyone who's interested in spirituality being accessible for anyone. Professionals, medical professionals, scientists. We invite everyone.
Absolutely. I'll send it out right after this. I just wanted to have something to show people, this exists. But yeah.
Beautiful.
Cool. All right, man. Take it easy.
You too, bro. I love you, man.
Love you too.